We're going to be talking about the display property, and basically you already know that every element has a position property. Every element also has a display property, and although there are quite a number of display property values, there's only a few that are really most commonly used, and that's because many of them are not supported in today's browsers as of yet. So we'll probably see more of those coming online later on, but I'm just going to focus on the ones that we'll most commonly be using. The most commonly used elements that you're basically going to be using the display property with are either going to be, they either have a value anyways of block or inline elements. So most of the time when we're talking about display, we're going to be dealing with block or inline elements, and in some situations we'll be changing their appearance, and this can be very helpful when you're starting to build a more complex web page. Block level elements are things like paragraphs, headings, lists, and they basically sit one above the other when displayed in the browser. Inline elements are things like span tags, image tags, bold, italicized tags. They sit side by side when they're displayed in the browser, and they only appear on a new line if there is, sufficient room. If there isn't sufficient room on the previous line. So they will appear inline in our text. And here I have some examples of all of these things working. Here is some inline text right here, and I'm just using the strong tag as an example. So I say inline strong tag, and it's within a paragraph. And actually down here I have some red text on my page and it basically says, make that a little shorter so you can see it. Here's some text I will hide. Now you see it. Now you ... This is a span tag that surrounds this, so that's also considered an inline element. And then the paragraph with the green background is a paragraph that is of course a block element, and here I have a list, an ordered list, and that of course also is a block element. So we're going to be using the display property to change block elements into inline elements and vice versa. This is a very powerful capability, and it basically allows you to do things like normally a row of links that might normally sit next to each other in a you can change it into a vertical stack so that you can use it in a sidebar navigation, and you don't need to use any BR tags to make them drop to the next line. So that's definitely something that we'll be visiting, and a lot of times we'll be using it on lists. Lists are block level elements. In some situations we'll want to make those inline elements depending on how we want them to display. And then the other display element that we're going to be working with is the display property of none, and it basically, when you have an element that has a display property of none, it basically is not visible on the page at all. So the space that the element was occupying is actually removed. So it's a little different from the visibility property which we were talking about in an earlier lecture. So let's see how some of these things work. I'm going to go ahead and show you my XHTML page that we're going to be working with. Let's just look down here. You can see here's my strong tag that surrounds this text right here. That of course is an inline element. I have my paragraph which displays with the green background, and I just applied a class to it, and the class I've called it inline, so we can see what happens when we change the behavior of the paragraph. Here's my list, and my list has nothing special on it, it's just an ordered list. So we'll go ahead and make some changes to our styles to control this shortly. And finally, here's my span tag, where I just wrapped the span tag around some of the text. And I just made these things different colors in my web page so that you could see what I was talking about right away. So let's go ahead and let's change some of the CSS. Here's the CSS that I started with, and these are all things that we've been working on throughout the course. So the first thing I did was removed all margin and padding from every element. The next thing I did was set a body font, a width, and just a little bit of margin top and margin left to push the text away from the top and the left edge of my browser. I went ahead and set paragraph sizing, and I set a margin on the bottom so I have some spacing in between my paragraphs. I went ahead and made a style, a class style for inline, and I just made the background color, and that of course is setting the background color of this paragraph to green. On my strong tag, I just went ahead and made the strong tag have a color and a background color, and that's so that it stands out within the paragraph text so we can easily see where it is. My ordered list simply has margin and padding on the left. I set the font size, I set the color, and I set a margin on the bottom, and that was just to let some spacing be around this. My LI items, my list items, have a padding on the right, and that's not actually doing anything here, but you'll see once we modify this that will become more important. And all I did is on the span class that I defined as hide me, I just defined a red color, so that is what makes this text appear red. So now let's go ahead and let's modify some of these styles so that we can further see how CSS is going to allow us to control these things. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to convert this inline strong tag to behave as a block level element. So how you do that is you basically are just going to go ahead and type display, and the display CSS property is going to allow you to make these elements act differently than they normally would. So we want to go ahead and make this act like a block level element. So I'm just going to set it to its display value to block. If I save my page and we refresh the page, you'll now see that the block level element is going to take up its own line in the code. So it no longer appears inline in between text. It actually drops to a separate line and takes out the entire space that it's allotted, which is 600 pixels on this particular web page. So this can be a very powerful feature. You're taking an inline element and you're telling it to behave as a block level element. Let's go ahead and do the reverse thing on this paragraph right here. So this paragraph, of course, paragraphs are block level elements. Let's make this display as an inline element, and you can see how this changes. Notice that there is spacing at the bottom of the paragraph, and that's because in my CSS I defined the margin bottom to have a spacing of 0.5 ems. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to come to the paragraph. This actually not all paragraphs, let's just apply this on our inline paragraph. So I'll come to my inline class, which I've applied to this green background paragraph, and let's change the display here to go ahead and show as an inline element. So I'll go ahead and set that to inline. Let's save our page, and when I refresh in the browser, you can see that my page went ahead and created an inline style. So everything that was part of my inline class, and it's basically everything within this paragraph, now is going to display as an inline element. So you can see that now there is no spacing at the bottom of the paragraph. And notice how before the paragraph was surrounded in like a green box. Now it has a ragged edge, and all of the text is basically has a green background behind it, but the paragraph itself is no longer surrounded in that green box. So this is the difference between how block level and how inline elements are going to work. So hopefully that made sense. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and affect our list. I'm going to go ahead and apply an inline display to my list items. So I'm going to come to my LI, and I'm going to go ahead and set the display to be inline. So let's save our page, and let's come over here and let's refresh the page, and you'll see what happens to my list items. As inline items, you can see they all jump onto the same line. So I no longer see my 1, 2, 3 that were part of my ordered list. Those basically disappear, and now these jump together. They are spaced out by 10 pixels, and that's because I put my 10 pixel as a right padding. If I don't have this here, if we set this to 0, which would be how it would work by default, and we refresh the page, you'll see that all of the list items are just slammed right together, and there's no spacing basically between them. So I just put that here so that we would have a little bit of spacing in between the words and make it a little bit easier to read them. And then the final display property that we're going to be working with is the hide. So you can see this text right here. Let's go ahead and let's give this a font weight of bold just to make this stand out a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and set the font weight to bold. I'll save and refresh in the browser, and you can see that my text is now bold. So here's my text. It's right in the middle of this paragraph right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come here and I'm going to turn the display for this item to none, and I'm going to save my page, and then I'm going to go ahead and refresh my page, and you'll see that the text completely disappears. The text is still in the code, it's still in our XHTML code, but it basically is now completely hidden. So the advantage of using the none display is that you can hide a styled element so it doesn't appear in a web browser. You can use a little bit of JavaScript programming and create, the ability to make that hidden element become visible by changing the display back to inline or back to block. Or you can just have an element with a display of none just suddenly, appear on your page. So that's kind of a cool thing to be able to incorporate into a page as well. So you've now been introduced to the display property, and you can see how you can basically, with CSS, force things that are one way to act another way. And this can be very valuable as we start to build more complex web pages.